I spent years believing I was invisible, always there, but never noticed, listening to everyone, but never being heard. And I told myself that was normal, that silence was safe, until one small moment changed everything. And I realized something that scared me. I was never invisible. I just never showed myself. Hello, and thank you for being here with me today. Before this story begins, I want to ask you something simple, something you may not often say out loud, but something you may have felt at some point in your life. Have you ever felt like you were invisible? Not completely invisible, not in a way where no one could see you at all, but invisible in a quieter, more subtle way. The kind of invisible where you are always there, always present, always part of the moment, but somehow no one really notices you. You sit in the same room as everyone else. You hear the same conversations. You share the same space, the same air, the same time. You are physically there, just like everyone else, and yet something feels different. It feels as if you are slightly outside of everything, as if you are watching life unfold instead of truly living inside it. People speak, laugh, share ideas, express themselves freely, and you listen. You understand more than they realize. But somehow, your presence feels quieter, less visible, less important. If you have ever felt that way, even just once, then maybe this story is for you. My name is Lucas, and for most of my life, I was the quiet one. I was the person people often forgot was even there, not intentionally. Not because anyone wanted to exclude me, but simply because I did not draw attention to myself. I was the one no one asked for opinions, not because I had nothing to say, but because I rarely offered my thoughts. I was the one who listened carefully to everything around me, who understood conversations deeply, but was rarely heard in return. And for a long time I believed that this was simply who I was. I thought it was normal. I thought that some people were just naturally quieter, more reserved, less expressive. I did not question it deeply. I accepted it as part of my identity. When I was younger, I used to tell myself that maybe I was just born this way. Maybe I was simply different from others. While some people found it easy to speak, to share, to express themselves without hesitation, I felt something holding me back. It was not fear in an obvious sense. It was not something I could clearly explain. It was more like a quiet hesitation, something subtle that appeared just before I spoke, something that made me pause, reconsider, and often remain silent. But as I grew older, I began to notice something that I had not understood before. I wasn't quiet because I had nothing to say. I was quiet because I didn't believe my voice mattered. That belief did not appear suddenly. It did not come from a single moment or a single experience that I could point to and say, "This is where it started." Instead, it was built slowly, over time, through many small experiences that seemed insignificant on their own. Moments when I spoke and no one responded. Moments when I shared something and it seemed to pass unnoticed. Moments when I tried to join a conversation, but the discussion moved on without acknowledging what I had said. None of these moments was dramatic. No one rejected me directly. No one told me that my thoughts were unimportant. But the silence that followed my words began to feel like an answer of its own. At first, I didn't think much of it. I assumed it was normal, that conversations simply moved quickly, that people did not always hear everything. But as those moments repeated, something began to form inside me, a quiet pattern, a quiet understanding. And over time, that understanding turned into a belief. If I stay quiet, I won't feel this. So I stayed quiet in class. I listened while others spoke. Even when I knew the answer, even when I had an idea, I often chose not to raise my hand. I told myself that someone else would say it, that I didn't need to speak. At home, I observed conversations more than I participated in them. I answered when asked, but I rarely added more than what was expected. With friends, I listened to their stories, their thoughts, their experiences, and I understood them deeply, but I shared very little of myself in return. Over time, silence became comfortable, not because it truly felt right, but because it felt safe. When you remain quiet, you avoid the possibility of being ignored. You avoid the discomfort of speaking and feeling like your words disappear into nothing. Silence becomes a kind of protection, a way of moving through the world without risking that quiet disappointment. But silence also creates distance, and I did not fully realize that at the time. The strange thing was that people liked me. They described me as calm, as easy to be around, as someone who listened well. I was included in groups, invited into conversations, and present in social spaces. From the outside, everything seemed normal. There was no obvious problem, no clear sign that anything was missing, but there was a difference between being liked and being known. People appreciated my presence, but they did not truly know me. They did not know what I thought, what I felt, what I believed. Not because they didn't care, but because I had never shown them. And in many ways, I had become invisible, not because others ignored me, but because I had learned to hide myself. That realization did not come all at once. It appeared slowly, like a quiet awareness growing over time. I began to notice that while I understood others deeply, very few people understood me in the same way. Conversations passed, moments were shared, time moved forward, but something inside me remained unseen. I was there, but not fully. I was present, but not expressed. And although I had convinced myself that this was normal, that this was simply who I was, a small part of me began to question it. A small part of me began to wonder what it would feel like to be heard, not just listened to, but truly heard. And that question, quiet as it was, would eventually begin to change everything. At first, being quiet felt safe. It felt like a kind of protection, a way to move through the world without drawing too much attention to myself. When you don't speak, you don't get judged. When you don't share, you don't get rejected. When you don't stand out, you don't feel exposed. There is a certain comfort in staying in the background, in observing instead of participating, in listening instead of expressing. For a while, that safety felt not only acceptable, but even desirable. It gave me a sense of control. It allowed me to avoid situations where I might feel uncomfortable or uncertain. And over time, I became very good at it. I became good at listening. I paid attention to what people said, but also to what they didn't say. I noticed tone, pauses, and small changes in expression. I learned to understand people in ways that often went beyond their words, because I spent so much time observing. I developed a sensitivity to others that made it easy for them to open up to me. I became the kind of person others felt comfortable talking to, the one they trusted, the one they turned to when they needed someone to listen. I was always there, always available, always calm, always easy to be around. From the outside, it seemed like a strength. People appreciated me. They described me as kind, as patient, as someone who understood them. I rarely caused conflict. I didn't interrupt. I didn't challenge. I didn't demand attention. And because of that, I fit easily into most situations. I became someone who adapted quietly, who made space for others without asking for much in return. But there was something no one saw. Every time I stayed silent, a part of me stayed unheard. Every time I chose not to speak, something inside me remained unexpressed. At first, those moments seemed small, insignificant, easy to ignore, but they did not disappear. They stayed, quietly accumulating over time. There were conversations where I had something to say but didn't, moments when an idea formed clearly in my mind, but I hesitated just long enough for the conversation to move on. By the time I considered speaking, it felt too late. The moment had passed, and I told myself it wasn't important. There were moments where I disagreed but stayed quiet, not because I didn't have a different perspective, but because I wasn't sure if it was worth expressing. I questioned whether my opinion would add anything, whether it would matter, and whether it would be understood. And instead of risking that uncertainty, I chose silence. There were times when I wanted to speak, when I felt the urge to share something real, something personal, something meaningful, but something inside me held back. A quiet hesitation, a familiar feeling that suggested it might be better to stay quiet, to avoid the possibility of being ignored or misunderstood. And over time, those moments began to change. They became something heavier, not in a loud or dramatic way. There was no single moment where everything suddenly felt overwhelming. It was quieter than that, subtler, more difficult to notice at first, but it was there, always present, always just beneath the surface. It was a feeling that followed me, loneliness, not the kind of loneliness that comes from being physically alone. I was often surrounded by people. I had conversations. I spent time with others. I was included. I was part of things, but I wasn't fully there. How can people truly know you if you never show yourself? That question did not come to me clearly at the time. I did not sit down and analyze my situation in that way. Instead, I simply felt something that I could not fully explain. A quiet distance between myself and the people around me. A sense that even though I was present, something essential was missing. I had built a version of myself that was easy for others to accept. A version that listened, supported, and adapted, but that version was incomplete. It did not include my thoughts, my opinions, my disagreements, my deeper feelings. Those parts of me remained hidden, not because others rejected them, but because I never gave them the chance to be seen. And because of that, something inside me began to feel disconnected. Conversations ended, but I often felt as though I had not truly participated in them. Time passed, but I felt as though I had not fully experienced it. Relationships existed, but they felt slightly distant, as if there was a layer between the people around me and me at the time. I did not question it deeply. I told myself a simple story. This is who I am. I believed that some people were just naturally quieter, naturally more reserved, naturally less expressive. I believed that this was my personality, something fixed, something that did not need to be changed. And in some ways, that belief made things easier. It gave me an explanation. It allowed me to accept my experience without examining it too closely. But deep down, something didn't feel right. It was not a strong or urgent feeling. It did not demand attention. It did not disrupt my life in obvious ways, but it was there, quietly present, like a small voice that I could almost hear if I stopped long enough to listen. A sense that there was more to me than what I was showing. A sense that I was holding something back. Not because I wanted to, but because I had learned to. A sense that while silence had protected me, it had also limited me. At first, I did not know what to do with that feeling. I did not know how to change something that had become so familiar, so deeply connected to the way I moved through the world. Silence had become a habit, and like many habits, it felt natural, even when it no longer served me. But that quiet discomfort continued to grow, not loudly, not dramatically, but steadily. And although I could still move through my days in the same way, still appear calm and composed, still be the person others expected me to be, something inside me was beginning to shift. I didn't have the words for it yet. I didn't have a clear understanding of what it meant, but I could feel it, and slowly, that feeling began to change the way I saw myself, even before I fully understood why. Then one day, something small happened. It was so small that no one else in the room would remember it later. It did not feel like an important moment. While it was happening, there was no dramatic event, no strong emotion that announced its significance. And yet, for me, that moment would quietly change everything. I was sitting in class, just like always. The same seat I usually chose, slightly toward the back, where I could see everything without being too visible. The same posture, relaxed but attentive. The same silence that had become so familiar to me that I barely noticed it anymore. It was a version of myself I had repeated so many times that it felt natural, almost automatic. The teacher asked a question. It was not a difficult question, at least not in a way that required deep thinking or complex understanding. It was the kind of question meant to invite participation, something simple enough for anyone who had been paying attention. Normally, someone in the room would answer quickly. There were always a few students who spoke without hesitation, who seemed comfortable filling the silence before it could fully settle. But that day was different. No one answered. The room became quiet. Not the comfortable kind of quiet that feels calm and peaceful, but a heavier silence. The kind that slowly fills the space and makes everyone more aware of it. You could feel it in the way people avoided eye contact, in the way some students shifted slightly in their seats, waiting for someone else to speak first. And for some reason, in that moment, I knew the answer. Not perfectly, not in a way that made me completely certain. There were still small doubts, small gaps in my understanding, but I knew enough to try, enough to say something that could move the conversation forward. And as soon as I realized that, something else happened. My heart started beating faster. It wasn't loud, but I could feel it clearly. That familiar tension began to build inside me, the one I had experienced many times before. It was not just about the question, it was about the moment. The possibility, the choice, speak or stay silent. That moment always felt the same. It appeared quickly, almost suddenly, and yet it carried weight. in that brief space of time, everything seemed to pause. My attention narrowed. The room faded slightly into the background, and all that remained was that single decision. My hand almost moved. I could feel it, that small, almost invisible motion, the beginning of a gesture that could have changed everything in that moment. It wasn't a big movement, just a slight shift, the beginning of raising my hand, the beginning of choosing to speak, and for a second, it felt possible. But then, just as quickly, something else appeared. That voice, it was not loud, but it was clear, familiar, immediate. Don't. What if you're wrong? What if people look at you? What if you embarrass yourself? The questions came quickly, one after another, not giving me time to think, only time to react. They felt convincing, even though I had heard them so many times before. They felt protective, as if they were trying to keep me safe from something uncertain. And just like that, the moment passed, my hand stopped. I stayed quiet again. The silence in the room continued for a few more seconds, stretching just long enough to feel uncomfortable. Then, as always, someone else spoke. They answered, and they were wrong. Not completely wrong, but not correct either. It was the kind of answer that showed effort, but not accuracy, the kind of answer I might have given myself if I had spoken. But something unexpected happened. The teacher smiled, not in a way that suggested disappointment or correction, but in a way that felt encouraging. And then he said something simple. Good try. That was all. 2 words, no criticism, no emphasis on the mistake, no sign that being wrong was something to avoid, just recognition, just acceptance, just encouragement. And that moment stayed with me, not because of the answer itself, and not because of the student who spoke, but because of what I realized as I sat there in silence, watching it happen. For the first time, I began to see something differently. People don't expect you to be perfect. They expect you to try. That realization was small, but it felt important in a way I could not immediately explain. For so long, I had believed that speaking required certainty, that if I was going to say something, it had to be correct, clear, and confident. I thought that mistakes would draw attention, that uncertainty would expose me, that anything less than a perfect answer was better left unsaid. But that moment challenged that belief. The student who answered had not been perfect. They had not been completely right. And yet, nothing negative happened. No one judged them. No one criticized them. The teacher did not focus on the mistake. Instead, he acknowledged the effort. Good try. Those words echoed quietly in my mind. What if speaking was not about being right? What if it were simply about being willing to try? That question stayed with me long after the class ended. It followed me as I walked out of the room, as I replayed the moment in my mind, as I thought about all the times I had stayed silent for the same reason. All the times I had waited for certainty, all the times I had chosen not to speak because I was afraid of being wrong, all the times I had held back, believing that my voice only mattered if it was perfect. And slowly, something inside me began to shift. It was not a dramatic change. I did not suddenly become confident or expressive. I did not raise my hand in the next class or speak without hesitation. But the belief had changed, just slightly, just enough. I began to question the idea that silence was safer. For the first time, I began to consider that maybe the risk was not in speaking, but in never allowing myself to be heard at all. And that small realization, quiet as it was, marked the beginning of something new, something I had not yet fully understood, but something that would eventually change the way I saw myself, my voice, and my place in the world. That realization didn't change me instantly. It wasn't the kind of moment that everything overnight or suddenly turns you into a different person. I didn't walk out of that classroom feeling confident or certain. I didn't suddenly become someone who spoke easily or shared my thoughts without hesitation. On the outside, nothing seemed different, but something had shifted, quietly, almost invisibly, somewhere deeper inside me. For the first time, I began to question my silence, not as something natural, not as something I was simply born with, but as something I had been choosing, even if I wasn't fully aware of it. That idea felt unfamiliar. For so long, I had believed that being quiet was just part of who I was, something fixed and unchangeable. But now, I began to wonder if it was something else entirely, something I had learned, something I had repeated so many times that it felt natural, even though it had started as a response. And that question stayed with me. How long am I going to stay like this? It followed me throughout the rest of the day, appearing in small moments when my mind became still enough to notice it. It was not a loud question, not urgent or demanding, but persistent. It didn't ask for an immediate answer. It simply stayed, waiting. That night, I couldn't stop thinking about it. I lay in bed, staring at the ceiling, replaying moments from the past in a way I had never done before. Not the big events, not the obvious memories, but the small, quiet ones, the conversations where I had something to say but didn't, the moments when I had an idea, a thought, or a question, but chose to remain silent, the opportunities that had appeared briefly and then disappeared simply because I had not reached for them. All the moments I stayed quiet, all the things I didn't say, all the chances I let pass, and for the first time, I felt something I had never fully allowed myself to feel before. Regret, not regret for something I had done, not for a mistake or a wrong decision, but for something else entirely. Regret for what I didn't do. Regret for the words I never spoke. Regret for the parts of myself I never allowed to exist outside my own thoughts. That feeling was unfamiliar, but it was also clear. It didn't overwhelm me, but it stayed with me, steady and undeniable. And in that moment, I made a quiet decision, not a big one, not something dramatic that would change everything at once. I didn't promise myself that I would suddenly become confident, or that I would speak all the time. That would have felt unrealistic, and maybe even impossible. It was something much smaller than that, something simple. Next time, I will try, that was all. No pressure to be perfect. No expectation to say the right thing, just a willingness to try. And the next day, that moment came again. Another class, another question, another silence, another choice. Everything felt familiar. The same room, the same kind of quiet, the same pause where no one answered right away. And once again, I felt that moment appear, that brief space where a decision needed to be made. But this time, something was different. I didn't think too much. I didn't give the voice in my head enough time to build its usual arguments. to ask its familiar questions, to pull me back into silence. I just raised my hand. For the first time, the movement felt small, but at the same time, it felt significant. I could feel my heart racing, faster than usual, as if my body was reacting before my mind could fully understand what was happening. My hand was slightly unsteady, but it was raised. I had made the choice. When the teacher called on me, I spoke. My voice shook, not dramatically, but enough for me to notice. My words were not perfect. There were small pauses, moments where I searched for the right way to express what I meant. My answer was not complete, not polished, not as clear as it could have been. But I spoke, and something changed. Not in the room. The classroom remained the same. The other students reacted the same way they always did. No one turned to look at me in surprise. No one judged me. No one made the moment feel bigger than it was, but inside me, something shifted. I felt something new, space. It was difficult to explain, but it felt as if something that had been closed for a long time had finally opened, even if only slightly. A sense of expansion, of possibility, of something moving where there had once been stillness. Like I had taken a step forward, like I had finally stepped into my own life, even if it was just one small step. And in that moment, I understood something simple. I wasn't invisible. I was just silent, and maybe that's the difference. Not that people don't see you, but you haven't shown yourself yet. That realization stayed with me, growing slowly, becoming clearer with time. For so long, I had believed that invisibility was something given to me, something I had no control over. I thought it was how the world saw me, how others perceived me, something fixed and external. But now I began to see it differently. Maybe it wasn't that I didn't matter. Maybe it was that I had learned to hide. And if that was true, then something else was also true. If I had learned to hide, I could learn to show myself. If you've ever felt invisible, if you've ever felt like you were present but not truly seen, maybe it's not because you don't matter. Maybe it's not because you don't have something worth sharing. Maybe it's not because others are ignoring you. Maybe you've just been hiding. And maybe your life doesn't change when people start noticing you. Maybe it changes the moment you stop hiding. Not all at once, not perfectly, not without fear, but one small moment at a time. One choice, one voice, one step forward, and sometimes that is enough to begin. Before we end this story, I want to tell you something honestly. For a long time, I thought my voice didn't matter. I thought being quiet was just who I was. But the truth is, it wasn't who I was, it was who I became. Because I was afraid to be seen, and maybe you felt that too. Maybe there are things you've wanted to say, but didn't. Moments you wanted to speak, but stayed silent. Not because you had nothing to say, but because you weren't sure if it mattered. But listen carefully. Your voice doesn't become powerful. When it's perfect, it becomes powerful the moment you decide to use it. And if this story made you feel something, if you saw a part of yourself in it, then don't let this be just another video you watch. And forget, stay. Because this is not just one story. This is a place where you can grow your English and slowly find your voice at the same time. So if you want to become more confident, if you want to understand English naturally, and if you want to keep listening to stories like this, then stay here with me, subscribe, and let's take this journey together. Because maybe this isn't just about learning English. Maybe this is the moment you stop hiding